Hello everyone, thank you for joining our webinar on Stoicism in and after the lockdown hosted by the Aurelius Foundation. Hope you're all well. To update you on the Foundation's activity, we will be supporting upcoming Stoic Week, which takes place on October 19th to the 25th, and the Global Stoic on Digital event on October the 17th. We've also got some more upcoming webinars, one with one of our other founders, Joe Easton, on Stoic wisdom and behaviours, and another with Wimbledon champion Pat Cash on resilience. So please stay tuned for those. We're also hoping to gear up with in-person events, hopefully next year, depending on COVID restrictions, of course, but we're hoping those can be global events. So let's get started with the webinar today. Please type and submit your questions or comments via the Q&A or chat functions on your Zoom toolbar at any time during the webinar, and we'll hope to get through as many as possible. Please also check out our social channels. We've got Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and a newly developed YouTube channel. So please do check those out and leave any feedback. So I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and I will now hand over to Justin Stead.
Thanks, Holly. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to have with me this afternoon Professor Christopher Gill. We'll talk in a moment about Christopher's background, and we'll get started on this afternoon's topic. At the moment, with lockdown the world starting to try to come alive again and try to return back to normality, we're still looking to continue the Foundation's activities, and at this stage, mostly based on the restrictions that are at hand, we're doing these events obviously digitally and through these webinars. But as Holly mentioned, there's some key events coming up around Stoicon, the global Stoic event, and Stoic Week that has been led by Dr. John Sellers here. Chris himself was chair of that event for a number of years. So the Foundation will be looking to support those events, and there's some very interesting events in person that we hope, as Holly mentioned, we want to get off the ground next year, both here in London, potentially across Europe, and some very interesting events in the United States as well, all subject to, of course, some sort of normalization. So we've been talking about Stoic behaviors and engaging on that front. So this afternoon, I'm very fortunate to have an Aurelius Foundation advisor with me, Professor Christopher Gill. Chris is a great supporter of the Foundation. His experience in Stoicism and the academic world of Stoic philosophy is well documented. And he's had previous classic posts at Yale, Bristol, amongst other universities, various research fellowships, as you can see. And he's written a number of books on ancient ideas, personality, and self, ancient psychology, ancient psychotherapy and ethics, Stoicism, including Mark Aurelius and Plato. So again, very pleased to have Chris with me this afternoon. So setting the scene then, we remain in a unusual period in society at the moment. And I think that the events and the disruption and the dislocation caused by the pandemic, it has created a situation where we've had, significant dislocation, where people have had their professional life upended, their family life, reconstructed, their ability to move very, very differently, certain freedoms taken away in the interest of public safety, the ability to travel dramatically restricted, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen that translate into all the things that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. And that's the external environment. What is also very interesting is the internal environment of individuals starting to reflect differently about how these events are causing them to think about themselves, their career, their happiness, their interactions with others, and so forth. And so this afternoon's conversation and the dialogue that Chris and I want to go over and the themes we want to discuss is looking at ways that Stoicism has, affected us during this pandemic and what will happen potentially after. So it's one thing to think about things during a crisis and coming out of that crisis, but are those behaviors and thoughts, are they sustainable? So without further ado, as we go through this initial introduction, I'd like to welcome the initial comments from Professor Gill. Christopher, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Very, very glad to be taking part of it, and welcome to everyone who's part of the session. Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting situation. In a way, it's a situation in which we've been kind of forced to become more Stoic. A lot of people I meet say, well, I know you're interested in this Stoicism thing. I feel I've been made to be a bit Stoic. We've been forced to become more resilient. We've been forced, or at least encouraged, to be much more neighborly, to care about the people around us and our community that we're part of in all sorts of ways. And we've also been forced, in a way, to behave in a more environmentally responsible way. We're not flying so much. Early on, we weren't driving very much. And that had actually significant and measurable effects on the carbon footprint and on and its contribution to global warming. So although there have been some pretty terrible things about what we've been through, there have also been some quite positive and interesting ones. So now the question is, what happens next? As lockdown is, as we hope anyway, eased, what are we going to do? Does all that Stoic type behavior go by the board as we go back to normal? Our governments on the whole are trying to encourage us just to go back to normal, just to go back to where we were. But I think a lot of people want to say, well, hang on, I'm not sure whether we want to go back to where we were in all sorts of ways. And I think that Stoicism can help us reflect and think about how we're behaving, how we should behave. And Stoicism can provide a framework that can make us or lead us do voluntarily some of the things that we've had, as it were, forced on us, and leading to do these things as a way of life and not just as a response to the situation. So that's the kind of theme I'd like to explore with you, Justin, and with any questions that come up. So how can Stoicism do this? Well, I think there's two main ways in which Stoicism can help us take forward some of the good practices that we've been having in lockdown. First of all, and what I'm mainly going to focus on, is looking at Stoic exercises on a regular basis. Some of the things that we standardly do in our modern Stoicism work on Stoic Week, and that people have been writing about in recent books. And secondly, by reflecting on some of the core basic Stoic ethical ideas which underlie those exercises. The exercises are fine, they're important, but they also rest on a kind of foundation of ideas. And I want to think about those too.
Yeah. I think, Chris, you said something very interesting there, and through the businesses and through the business community. And we're looking forward to stepping through this first point in a moment. But one comment there that I think is resonating for a lot of people at the moment is centering on the way they work as they come back into the work environment, whether someone has been furloughed and they're coming back, or they've worked through the pandemic period and they've worked remotely. There's a very interesting dynamic coming where people have found that they can work successfully from home, that they can interact successfully with their colleagues, that they feel like they have a better work-life balance. The number of examples in companies that I'm working with, we have some managers and executives and just people that are starting out in their first jobs. They were commuting anywhere from 10 to 14 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, that has changed. Mm-hmm. And now they have, in some ways, that 10 to 14 hours a week returned to them because they're not sitting on the tube or not sitting on a train or exactly in between. And I've seen a reaction to that, I would say for the most part, extremely positively. And people are trying to figure out how to utilize that time more effectively. because it does take a certain stress out of the day. So one of the things that I've been sharing with people is some of the exercises we're going to talk about this afternoon, that giving that time back, because the Stoics think about time in a very clear way, that in essence, as Seneca says, it's not that we don't have enough time, it's just that we waste it.
Yeah.
So now we're facing a situation where society, for a lot of people, the time that they have might even be more. But the question is, will they waste it per se, or will they effectively be able to utilize that give back in time that they haven't had for a long period of time or have never had, and be able to implement it into ways, whether it's Stoic behaviors or themes or otherwise, to bring out more balance, more calm, more stillness in their life. So I just wanted to make that comment, because the practicality of what Stoicism can bring to the table on a daily basis, developing rituals or habits or different things, I think is highly valuable.
Yeah, I think this whole range of questions is, I mean, that's going on, this big discussion about, should we get all the workers to go back, all the people in business go back to the workplace? Can they work from home? All that question is also has this bigger dimension about it. Is what kind of life do we want to lead? What kind of life do we want to enable for people? So I think it's you're at the sharp end of this in a business, but I think it's a really important area for debate.
So let's move forward then. We'll focus on this first point by practicing some of the Stoic exercises.
Okay, let's do that. Well, what can promote resilience? Well, one very method that we recommend a great deal is exercising what we call the dichotomy of control, the different distinguishing between what is and is not within our control, and focusing on doing properly what we can actually affect, and recognizing, accepting that a great deal does not fall within our power, the power of any of us at any one time. Epictetus puts this very clearly in the handbook. Some things are within our power, while others are not. Within our power is our opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not in our power are our body, our property, reputation, status, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. And distinguishing these two kinds of things, the Stoics think, is crucial for making proper choices, for managing emotions, and responding to difficult and troubling situations with resilience. I think before we go on, I think I'd like to sort of link that with the COVID situation. I think that a lot of the frustration that people have had during these past months is a desire to kind of control the situation. They've wanted to say, well, can't we bring it about that it all kind of goes away. Now, in fact, there have been specific things that all of us can do. There have been, certain, the obvious things, social distancing, cleaning hands and so on. There's some things we can do, but there's a kind of desire, there's an inbuilt desire to do more than you can actually achieve. Of course, we can achieve these things by collective action, but I think individuals have this kind of desire sometimes to just kind of make things better. And that's, I think, been a source of huge frustration. So I think this dichotomy of control, which is, of course, a general piece of advice, can be really useful under the present situation.
I'd absolutely endorse that, and bringing that into some context in the business world. There's a number of peers of mine who had worked very hard in business for a long period of time. They built a business of success, and they were getting ready to crystallize an event or creating value or to move their business along in an exciting way. And they'd really worked for extensive periods of time here. And some of those desired events were going to take place in the first quarter of this year. And then in the space of, literally 6 weeks, those events went away from the horizon. And also the profits in some of those companies, and in fact, many companies, reduced from, anywhere from 70 to 100% to even losing money.
Yes.
So to really tie in with what you're saying here, all of a sudden you're cruising along, you're managing a business, it's been very successful, and a pandemic comes along and wipes out everything. So people have had to change their mindset immediately and go into what is controllable, and what am I going to do to try and work through this, and what is and the mindsets had to change. Now, in some of these individuals, I've seen colossal heartbreak, and it's been very, very difficult. But on the other side of the coin, and in one particular instance, I've seen someone who was on the event of a lifetime of achievement, crystallizing through his business, and it's been paused at this moment. And instead of licking his wounds or instead of being sorry for himself, he's licked his wounds and immediately realized that this was completely out of his control. Mm-hmm. He's gone busy on communication. He's gone busy with his team. He kept everyone on board, and he was a real leader. But what impressed me the most was the fact that he realized and he communicated, well, this is absolutely out of our control.
Yeah. I think that's what we find, because we're so used in the modern world to being able to manage things, to organize things, and here we've come slap up against something that we can't control.
That's right.
We won't accept that. So I think this is a really at the moment a really useful exercise.
And Chris, one of the things that I try and do, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on this, and it comes back to the good habit of a Stoic and of journaling, because I think there is an assessment process to go through almost on a daily basis, or on every couple of days, or even on a weekly basis, and look back on the major events of that day, that week, and over a period of time, and realize and take into your own understanding, that event was out of my control, that event was within my control, or that event was out of my control, but my reaction to it was within my control.
Yeah.
And I think I'd come back and I just would like to get your thoughts on, doing that process of analyzing and that assessment. I think journaling is a really powerful way to do that. It's not enough, at least in my experience, to just be saying, well, that's out of my control, because I'll tend to get caught up in emotion that it's not. But I notice when I journal and categorize things and really think them through, and occasionally I'll take advice and take counsel, take mentorship and say, was that out of my control, or was that actually in my control? And I didn't manage it well. But the journaling piece, I think, is a really important part of getting this assessment right.
I think that's absolutely right. Seneca says we should do this at the end of every day. We should assess how we behaved and take stock of our thoughts every day, and do that mentally. But I think also a lot of people find it helpful to do that, as you say, writing it down as in a journal, and to reflect on it over a period of time. And then that can be really helpful, because you can tell whether you're making progress. You can tell whether you're making progress in understanding and applying the dichotomy of control and other features that we're going to talk about.
And Chris, on that, I think, again, from a written perspective, I always, when I've been asked about this a couple of times over the last couple of months about journaling, and I always say that, look, it's not like you have to write a thesis every night.
No.
It's not meant to be critiquing every minute of the day, but I think the process needs to be, short, sharp. It can be short and sharp, I should say. You can write more if you want, of course, but short, sharp, as you know. One of the things I think you just mentioned, which is very powerful, it does create a catalogue of review.
Yeah.
That over time you can take an assessment, look back what you've written, and look back at events tend to repeat, and how someone has reacted to those events months ago, years ago, and how someone is reacting. I'm certainly noticing in my own sphere of influence and interactions through business, how I deal with things now is dramatically different in some areas to how I dealt with things years ago. And I think having that record of account is really powerful to deliver this particular theme.
Yeah, I think you're right. The notes don't have to be very long, but they have to be to the point. They have to be relevant and to bring out the key features of your experience and your responses.
Great.
Okay, let's look at Marcus and resilience. He gives a beautiful illustration of the dichotomy of control. And he's urging himself, Marcus is always he's journaling. Marcus writes a kind of philosophical journal. And he urges himself to distinguish how we can respond to what we call bad luck, which is, of course, just what we're doing at the moment. Be like the headland on which the waves break constantly, which stands firm while the foaming waters are put to rest about it. He imagines someone saying, "It's my bad luck that this has happened to me." And then he replies to himself, on the contrary, say, "It is my good luck that although this has happened to me, I can bear it without getting upset, neither crushed by the present nor afraid of the future. Surely," he tells himself, "surely what has happened cannot prevent you from being just, high-minded, self-controlled, thoughtful, self-respecting, free, and the other qualities whose presence enables human nature to maintain its character." So it's very, very natural, isn't it, in a situation like the present, to think, well, what terrible luck, like your business friend that you referred to. He might have said, "Oh, look, that's really bad luck. It's my terrible luck." But he didn't. He said, well, what can I do now? How can I cope with the situation? And he did what Marcus is describing here as expressing the virtues. You can do all you can. We're not going to be completely virtuous, but you can do everything you can to exercise the virtues. And that's the whole point about the virtues. In every situation, however much you're constrained in other ways, you can always behave, or you can always try to behave and work towards behaving in a virtuous way, expressing the four cardinal virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control, or these sort of these subdivisions of that virtue, those virtues here. So the dichotomy of control is about distinguishing what we can and can't do. What's within our power is to try to practice the virtues. What is not within our power is to control everything in our situation and lives. So we need to turn bad luck into good luck. And I think this is a really fine example of this, and something we can keep that kind of idea in our minds as we deal with the situation.
I think the other thing that struck me on this piece is dealing with events and the environment when things go against us.
Mm-hmm.
But over the course of a lifetime, this is also quite applicable when things go for us.
Mm-hmm.
So that the ability to manage through the more challenging times using principles that we're discussing here, and the assessment on it, and understanding what the controllable is. But over the years, I've seen also, and using some of my own experiences, that when you do have some success, it's also very important to keep an eye on this particular point as well.
Yeah.
That you understand that, as Seneca often references, that the goodwill of the universe or fortune will, as quickly as it comes, it can be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And as quickly as you are in trouble, you can find your way out.
Mm-hmm.
It just is managing the self-control within, and those in what you just referenced, Chris, managing towards the controllables, or living the principles of the virtues, for example, on either side of the coin.
Yeah.
And I think we tend to lean on this one, particularly when it's difficult, and it's a very difficult period in society at the moment. No one's denying that. But it's also when we come out of lockdown,
mm-hmm.
and we go into hopefully a more robust and confident economic period. People are back in work, and society is more sure of itself. and we're back to some sort of normalization, and take the good things out of this period. But also, I think it's a very valuable piece of understanding that, wow, this thing was so bad so suddenly. Now, will it be just a memory and we forget the principles when things are good? I think this is just equally applicable as well.
Very, very much so. Yeah, really very much so. Okay, shall we go on? So we talked earlier about how in the situation we've been, there's, and a lot of people have commented on this, that there's a kind of sense of neighborliness, a sense of community that wasn't often present before. And that because people have been at home, they've been more aware of their own neighborhood and aware of what they can do for other people. And also, of course, there have been some outstanding examples of acting on behalf of other people by key workers and people in NHS and so on. So I think that's been one of, and I think a lot of people have found that's a really valuable feature of the last few months, and one that we certainly don't want to lose. We don't want to go back to a kind of rather competitive way of thinking about social relations that can often become dominant. So here's another useful exercise that can really help us, I think, with relationships. So Heracles, who was a Stoic of 2nd century, he said, put forward this exercise, which people find very helpful, I think. You think of yourself at the center of a series of circles of relationships. So your immediate family is around, then your larger, your extended family, then friends, neighbors and work colleagues, then members of the same neighborhood or your organization, the business, then those who are living in the same city or region, then members of the same state, and then foreigners, other human beings, including people who might be refugees and asylum seekers. They're outside the circles, but they're still human beings. And what Heracles encourages us to do is to reduce the circles. So you give to the outer circle the same importance and emotional weight we'd give to the one inside it. So we treat foreigners as if they were fellow members of our country. You see, treat work colleagues as members of our extended family. And a technique he suggests is try applying to the outer circle the same names that you would give to the inside one. So you treat foreigners, become fellow Brits or fellow Australians or fellow Americans. So you're not using the words that you're not using the language that pushes them out. You're using the language that brings them in. And so he's not saying just do away with it. He's not saying the family is nothing and has no meaning. Of course it does. It's very important emotionally for us. And friends and neighbors and so on can be very important. So he's not saying do away with all those circles, but reduce the circles. And I think this exercise, well, partly it makes us raise questions about about the nature of our relationships. It makes us think harder where our commitments or obligations lie. And it also gives us a vivid illustration of the Stoic idea of the brotherhood and fellow citizenship of all human beings, of what all human beings have in common. And again, I think this is something that's, again, really useful exercise in the present situation, because I think we've all become much more aware how interdependent we are, how much we rely on key workers and people in medical profession, but also on everyone. We rely on everyone else behaving in a way that doesn't infect us, and of course we should behave in a way that doesn't infect other people. And we've become much more aware that we are a single world. We're all in this together. What happened in China had an effect on us here in Britain. What happened in Italy had an effect on us. The way we behave has an effect on the countries to which we go. So there's I think the whole pandemic, this word pandemic, it's everywhere. It's given us this sense of a kind of global a fellowship or citizenship that we're part of. So I think that's another very, at the moment, really useful exercise, and one that can help us, I think, in coping with our situation and in carrying forward the messages.
Yeah, I think this is a terrific theme that requires everyone to think more about, and one of the great benefits to come out of or a silver lining to come out of the pandemic. And I do believe when I say the word benefit, I stand behind that. I think there will be benefits that do come out of the pandemic in terms of good things that have transpired, despite the chaos that has also taken place. And I hope that this particular point is something that is taken forward, because despite various media highlights of social distancing falling over and so forth, and people not following the rules, at least in my interaction and traveling, I've been abroad for a week earlier in August, and then I've just been away out of London for the last 3 weeks. I would say 90 to over 90% of the time, people were courteous. People were very aware of social distancing protocols. I would just in my own observation see that the general politeness was much higher. There was a sensitivity there that people were looking to be more sensitive to older people, to younger children, just in the travel that we did. There was a sense of, look, we have to try and follow the rules. Now, there's been plenty of incidents and media hype about people breaking the rules and doing their own things and all the rest of it. And that's just a part of the human condition of how we operate. But I really do believe, and I think your sentiments here are very good, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to go forward now, because this is a shared problem globally. So, everyone has their story of friend or family or someone who's had COVID, being mildly affected or dramatically affected, but it is a global effect. And some of the labeling of the pandemic by certain political figures has been very unfortunate, because that again just deepens negativity between nations and people, versus taking the higher view and say, look, this is something that's occurred. It is global. We live in a very global society where transmission of people, ideas, and in this case viruses, because of the world that we've created, is very quick. It's very quick. But the ability to stand back and see the effect where human nature's greater good and better side and kindness and generosity and politeness, I think is really gratifying to see. And I've certainly seen it in the business world as well, how people are being much more sensitive. For example, people not being able to make meetings because they've had to take their kids to school, or they've had to pick their kids up early, or the kids are being homeschooled. And the ability to observe other members of the team rallying around that person to support them has been really wonderful to see. And that's unprompted, just general goodwill to man, and fellow colleague that I've personally observed over the last periods and the last months, and especially in the last month when I was moving around a bit more than previously. So I think this one is a really, really strong theme, and I hope it's a positive theme that continues after the pandemic is brought more under control.
Great. Well, let's go on to the a further exercise that bears on the question of living in a more environmentally sustainable way, as we have perforce been doing. Obviously, the Stoics didn't know about global warming and the environmental crisis, but nonetheless, they have ideas that can be helpful to us who are experiencing this problem and having to deal with it, and on the whole, failing to deal with it, actually. Marcus especially stresses the importance of seeing yourself as an integral part of nature and aiming to give yourself, your character and life, the same qualities of order and wholeness that are inbuilt into the natural world. And I think this exercise can support the other two exercises, actually, and can also help us promote a more environmentally sustainable and responsible way of thinking and way of life. So let me give you a couple of, on the next slide, of some Marcus passages. One should always keep in mind these things: what the nature of the whole is, and what my nature is, and how my nature is related to that of the whole, and of what kind of part it is of what kind of whole. And that no one can prevent me always doing and saying what is in accordance with nature of which I am a part. And the second passage: respect the highest power in the universe. This is what uses everything and directs everything in the same way. Respect the highest power in yourself, which is the same in kind as the other power. So I think the way in which I think these ideas are very powerful in general, but they also bear on the environmentalism, because they encourage us to see ourselves fundamentally as part of nature. Too often we've said, there's humanity on the one hand and nature on the other, and we can do what we want with nature. No, we are part of nature. We are part of that whole. We have to do all we can to keep that whole and to sustain its integrity and its structure and wholeness. Otherwise, the consequences will be terrible. So I think Marcus gives us that, can help to give us the kind of attitude that can help us have that sense of being part of nature, part of the whole, and can help us behave better in this respect.
Yeah, I think, again, terrific summary. There's a number of comments here that I would add to this. One of the amazing things that's going to be part of the post-mortem on this whole period, and you referenced it, Chris, is around the environment and how quickly, in some instances, depending on the location in the world and depending on the factor involved, how quickly the environment has responded very positively because of less influence of human movement, for example. And whether we're seeing it in some of the cities that have slowed down for lack of economic activity, the lack of international travel, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the statistics that are being built up at the moment that are continuing to build at this stage are quite remarkable. And what it says to me, in one sense, is that nature is very accommodating and has an ability to respond very quickly to positive moves that the human race, in adjusted behavior, that nature can respond very, very positively, and regeneration. So that's definitely the case. And there's a lot of activity in the scientific world at the moment going on to try and analyze and create those insights of understanding, which, again, talking to our theme today, I hope that continues to some degree. Look, the world has to come back online. People need to get back to work, but it needs to be done differently. And if some habits, behaviors, etc., can contribute to a rejuvenation of nature, is very important. The second point I would make is that people have seen during this time a return to nature. There's a lot of very interesting behavioral patterns and data being collected that people, one of the most important activities during this whole period has been walking. Yeah. People have required, as part of their daily discipline, to get out and still exercise, and they have taken the opportunity to get back to a very simplistic activity in walking. And the Stoics, in many respects, in ancient times, were great walkers.
Indeed.
It's well known that Aristotle did a lot of his speeches and seminars, if you will, and spoken lectures while walking. Yeah. So
on the Stoa, the painted Stoa, they walked up and down as they gave their lectures.
That's right. That's right.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. Maybe we should sort of begin to wrap things up a little bit. So shall I go on to the key Stoic ideas, and then some kind of take-home messages from the discussion. Okay, so I said these exercises have a kind of underlying theoretical basis, and there's three ideas that I'd like to pick out and reflect on. One is that our happiness in life depends not on things such as health, property, or even the welfare of our loved ones, though the Stoics believe that these things have real value and importance. But happiness depends, the Stoics think, on developing and exercising the virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. This is something that lies within our power at all times, and it is what turns bad luck into good luck, as Epictetus and Marcus remind us. So the basis of happiness, the fact that we have happiness is up to us in a way. Our happiness is up to us because it depends on only we can develop the virtues. If we do so, it brings real happiness. Secondly, relating to human nature, the Stoics believe that all human beings have the same essential nature. Human beings, compared with other animals, are rational and sociable, those two qualities linked together. And all human beings share the same basic motives, that is, for caring for ourselves, which we do best by developing the virtues, and to caring for others, which again we do by developing the virtues and applying the virtues in the way we treat other people. And this shared human nature is the basis of the Stoic idea of the brotherhood of humankind, one of their most distinctive and original ideas. Thirdly, is the Stoic view that all human beings form integral parts of the natural universe, and we should live our lives in this way, working to maintain and preserve the natural order by creating order in our own character and lives, and also by the way we behave towards the natural world. So there are these three fundamental ideas, which of course we could talk about for hours, but they just wanted to sum them up, which underlie the exercises we've been talking about. So let's have a look at the next slide and the sort of take-home messages that follow on from these three key ideas. So I think what we've tried to bring out in our conversation is that we should work on building up resilience by distinguishing what is and is not in our power, and by developing the virtues which are always in our power. We've suggested that we should aim to keep up our neighborliness and sense of community by trying to contract the circles of your relationships and seeing all human beings as brothers and sisters and fellow citizens in the universe. And we should aim to lead a more environmentally responsible life by thinking of yourself as an integral part of nature as a whole, and by aiming to maintain and preserve the order of nature. And I think, Justin, you've got some other points you'd like to bring up about take-home messages too at this point.
I think these are very clear and very identifiable and very attributable to the situation that we're working through, that these are considerations that can be applied. And one of the key goals of the Aurelius Foundation has always been to try, and as we said on our launch event in London, is that people do a lot of things to eat well, to go to the gym, professional improvement, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the goals of the foundation is make sure that every time you're engaging with the foundation in some respect, we're asking you to go into the gym of inner thinking, moral responsibility, ethical thought process, and taking actual practical things out of these discussions and seminars and applying them clearly on a daily basis into your life. And I think these are great examples of continuous thought. And they're reinforced, if I may again, Chris, which I'm sure you agree, they are reinforced by journaling.
Yeah.
I just believe in that aspect so much, because it is a continual reminder, and it builds what Marcus would call, and as he references and has been so readily quoted since time began, since the meditation become so relevant, is the inner citadel. And returning there and analyzing that. And to build on your comments Chris, in terms of some takeaways and things to actually do and consider and implement. I recently came across this masterclass on the Calm app by Ryan Holiday. Now, Ryan Holiday needs no introduction to the modern Stoic movement. I think he's a terrific articulator of Stoic principles, and his work has been well documented. And I think he's a leading voice in modern Stoicism. And this particular podcast, I would highly recommend for everyone listening and for people following the members of the foundation, because it really does drive into everything that you were talking about, Chris, on a very practical level. It's an outstanding podcast. It's taking the things that, Chris, you just gave an overview on, and in some ways, just building out really practical daily habits and rituals that you build habits. And even as a former athlete and as a businessman with some success, I try to build a daily, weekly, monthly, annually, and consistent improvement, always consistently improving performance and analyzing that performance, but underpinned by habits that also continually evolve. And these things that Ryan articulates on this podcast about waking up early and the reasons why, setting realistic expectations, setting out stillness through meditative process, focus on the essential. And I think that ties back into one of the key things from you today, Chris, is that the pandemic has forced us to think about things differently. It just has. And his piece on focus on the essential and decluttering your life and simplifying and knowing what's important, I think the pandemic has really struck a nerve with people that, boy, now I am forced, if you will, or highly encouraged, or in a position where I need to start thinking potentially differently because I've just lost my job. The company's just let me go. Or my family members have been affected, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this point 5 is very interesting as well. And I know you've touched on this before, Chris, and so has John. I think sometimes Stoics get a bit of a bad rap about being negative, about being dour, about just acceptance on everything, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Ryan in this podcast does an outstanding job of showing that Stoics are positive and they're resilient, and they move into a different zone when things go wrong because they have an acceptance, but also the ability to move out of that and look for positives, knowing that this event has happened to be, and now it's now out of my control. There are silver linings here. And even in this pandemic, you're seeing businesses and entrepreneurs and communities and families rally in a very different way positively. And I think that's a really outstanding element that Ryan touched on. Walking, we've discussed as well, and the power of walking, and again, having as part of your daily discipline. The journaling we've discussed, and I think this is crucial in a Stoic's journey, to have those touch points each day. And it crosses across other things here around about seeking out stillness, and helps you with focusing on the essential. It's about looking into situations and finding the positive. And I think that's touched on here. And of course, the last point, which we've talked about, and we talked about it recently on the webinar about mortality and Seneca's view on that. And I think that it's been touched on here during the pandemic. People have suddenly realized my time is different. How do I look forward into that time? What age am I in life? Could this happen again? If it happens again, where am I? All of a sudden I had a business or an opportunity and it was taken away from me completely. How am I dealing with that? That could happen again in 3 years' time, etc. I think that mortality piece, and I never see it in Stoicism as being a negative. I just don't. I see it as keeping you focused on the time that you have in the season of life where you are, to allow you to keep prioritizing on the things that are really essential to you. So, Chris, would you comment on any of this, or just quickly?
Well, I'm conscious time is going on, Justin. So I guess should we move on to the Q&A?
Yeah, let's do that. We've got a few minutes left. We've about 10 minutes.
I think we've got 3 questions lined up, if I'm reading the thing.
I've got I've got a few more here, but look, we'll probably have to just concentrate on the three and then we'll close up.
Okay. Okay.
The reaction's been good, but my final comment is I would really suggest everyone that if you get a moment, this is really worthwhile stuff, again, from Ryan Holiday on Stoic Wisdom for Life on the car map. So on that note, we've got some further reading here, but before we go there, I'm going to turn back to Holly. Holly, if you can come back online and let's go through a few questions. And Chris, I'll let you start off with a response and then I'll come behind you.
Okay, question 1. How to remain stoic when you seem to be on the cusp of being long-term unemployed and you so desperately want to keep going and not give up?
Okay.
Chris, would you like me to tackle that first?
Why don't you tackle that while I think about it?
Yeah, I will tackle that first, because it's been very unfortunate during the pandemic that in a number of my interests, we've had that situation come up where we've had to, unfortunately, colleagues have been affected by redundancies and restructuring and so forth. And we as a company have tried to make sure that we can deal with everyone squarely, fairly, and openly. But then also when decisions have to be made, we're trying to make sure that we support people through extension of the furlough process, ways of networking and relationships, and then just remaining in contact with people to make sure that even in my own role, that I can be a reference for people and help them and stay in touch with people. And I think when these are very difficult times and when people are facing long-term unemployment, it's a daunting task. Mm-hmm. It's a daunting task. There's no doubt about that. And at this time, it's even more daunting because the jobs that are available and the recession that we're in is looking like for the foreseeable future that could potentially be worse. But I still come down to, and I use this, and these are themes that I discuss with people when they're in this situation. I make myself available to talk with people in this situation. And the advice or the counsel I give them is it still comes back to the Stoic ability to control the controllables.
Yeah.
And having daily discipline, daily rituals that keep your mind, body, spirit healthy, happy, and optimistic. And that you have a set of activities every day that you continually renew. And that could be along the lines of, I'm continually in contact with headhunters. And I just don't send my headhunter a note and stay in line with him, or a recruiter or something. I badger them consistently. And I stay on it and on it and on it. Then I have my networks that I've built over a period of time, and I stay on them politely. But you're not necessarily asking them to influence, but you stay engaged. The biggest thing I find for people that potentially are facing long-term unemployment, they become unengaged. They tend to not to rely that it will come to you. You have to control the controllables, keep the inner peace as best as you can, and it's not easy, and then react through the controllables is opening up networks, stay on recruiters, and then fundamentally making sure that you're willing to try other things and keep yourself active. I have some people that recently have changed career dramatically, but they wanted to stay active. They wanted to have their resume still activated. They did something that was either well below their capability and took on multiple roles, but they stayed active because they wanted to keep their skill set going of turning up on time, being reliable, engaging with other people, engaging with customers. So those are the three things that I would advocate as a thought process to react into that.
I think maybe we go on to the next question. I think that deals very thoroughly with that.
Yeah, we've got a question regarding the US election. The outcome of an election would likely further affect the pandemic response, which has clearly been problematic in the US. While an individual cannot control the outcome of an election, it adds to uncertainty and anxiety within a population. How do we exercise what we can control in the political as well as the health of business and global health?
Well, we work to support those ideas and parties that we do everything in our power to support those parties and principles that we value. And in the last US election, that didn't happen. There were a lot of Democrats who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. because they wanted Larry Sanders. So I think it's a very important when the chips are down that people decide what is really important for them, what side they're on, and how to bring about change. So
and I would add to that, I'm a US citizen as well, so I will be voting this November. I don't think it would take a particular genius to figure out which side of the coin I'll be voting on, but I'll let everyone mull that over. But I think that, Chris, you touch on it there. When I'm talking to fellow Americans who are dear friends and so forth, one of the most important things to me is, you know, it's one thing to complain, it's another thing not to vote. And Chris, you just touched on it. No matter what happens, and it comes into your summary, one of the key points of today's webinar is the circles of influence.
Yeah.
If you are not happy and you have a voice and you don't mark the card, then I think you're dealing yourself out of the process. And to me, I find it living in a democracy that people don't take responsibility to vote. No matter what the outcome is, at least you've done your bit. You have participated in the process. You have participated for the greater good, whatever the result. I think the US is an alarming situation right now, based on the fact that the pandemic is still a big problem over there. It looks rather chaotic, but there's a lot of different things happening as well. Why should the US stock market be at 29,000 crossing this week with the type of unemployment and the type of economic outlook that's going there? So when things go up, they certainly do come down. And when things are down, they certainly end up eventually going up. So I think it still comes back to, you know, what can I control? Yeah. And people get very agitated about the political process here and about the political process. Well, the one controllable is you can vote. The one controllable is that you can participate in your community on Stoic values. And everything else you can let go because that's out of your sphere of influence.
Exactly. Yeah.
Holly, next question.
Are there any deficiencies you have found in Stoicism? And if so, how do you fill these gaps? Do you regularly look to other philosophies for guidance?
Well, I have thought about this. I don't think it's kind of obvious what the gaps are. I tell you one thing that the Stoics don't do. They don't have that kind of way of looking at, if you like, the social context. That's very much a part of the modern way of thinking about things since the 19th century. We tend to think that, well, you've got to put things into, I don't mean they think a lot about society, but they don't think about the effect of broader social movements and influences on the way we've come to be now. So I think that's a kind of insight that we've gained from the 19th century and 20th century. But that's a kind of, we can build that in. We can be aware of that. And this, I'm not suggesting that the Stoics aren't aware of the importance of society and of social obligation and social connection. They certainly are. In other ways, I think Stoicism is a very wide-ranging and deep philosophy, and I haven't found many gaps.
Yeah, I would in closing this off, and then this will be the fun. We're just about to run out of time. In fact, we've got 1 minute left. And I would just center on your last point there, Chris. I was a fledgling and failing philosophy major in college in the United States. But during that period, I did have the opportunity to read extensively and on a personal basis have searched up and down the philosophical spectrum, at least in my own little world, for a sense or a way and a framework of living a happy life. A peaceful life, a calm life. And of all the different things that I've read and come across, whether it's Eastern philosophy or, Nietzsche, you name it, for me personally, and I don't want to advocate my views completely on anyone, that's not what I'm saying, but my search that it is very hard, the deeper that you go into Stoicism, the deeper that you read across all of the authors, the deeper that you understand all of the letters of Seneca, and the deeper you understand how Stoicism has the ability to address every single emotion, most circumstances and environments of the human being, emotions, and the problems they engage. Stoicism has a very sensible, logical, and peaceful way of solving problems and creating opportunities and creating well-being and harmony within a visual. I haven't found anything as good. And I found that the more I studied, the more I read, the more I engaged, the more fascinated I was by Stoicism because of the broad spectrum of its reach and understanding. And I keep learning every day, every week, every month, every year, and keep taking on attributes of understanding. And it continues to surprise me. So, you know, it's, as a foundation, we're advocating it, we believe in it, and we're holding the torch to it. We hope that people can see the value of it. But I would just simply say, as Chris said there, there's not that many holes. And the deeper you get into it, I think you'll find that that's the case. But it's worth the effort, the time, and most importantly, the application. You have to apply. But being a philosopher and attempting to be a philosopher isn't about reading a nice book and feeling good about it and having a cup of tea and going back to your life. It's about taking the things that Chris discussed today, the things that Ryan Holiday discussed in that app, and putting them into the actions on a daily basis and seeing your behaviors, your emotions change. So Stoicism has stood the test of time. And last year at Stoicon, there was a great, I've mentioned this before, there was a great ex-military colonel, I think he was, speaking in Athens, and he made a great comment, and it's true. He said, this stuff is good, and it's always been good. And he said, in 1,000 years on the outer reaches of this universe, there might be a space station, there might be an astronaut sitting on that space station looking out into the universe. And one thing's for certain, he'll be reading a copy of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, because it will stand the test. It has stood the test of time, and it will continue to stand the test of time, no matter where we go as a human species on our ongoing evolution. On that note, Chris, any final comment?
No, I think you've wrapped it up very well, Justin. I've really enjoyed our discussion, and I hope that it's been helpful to everyone here.
Yes. So once again, Chris, thank you so much. Holly, thank you as always for orchestrating. I'll leave it there because we're 2 minutes running over, so forgive us for that. We've got some great initiatives continually going in the foundation. We look forward to keeping everyone up to speed. We're very methodical about what we're doing, and we wish everyone all the best as you're working through the pandemic. And we hope that as things go forward, that whatever normalcy returns to us all, that the good things that you've taken out of the pandemic period continue. On that note, goodbye and good luck. Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye now.